Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. Hi, and welcome to the DevelopSec podcast. I am your host, James Jardine. Today I want to talk a little bit about the why. We talk a lot in security about having to do things. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do input validation, you have to do output encoding, you can't have username harvesting. Right? We've got all these different things out there, and we just tell you not to do it. And maybe we try to go into a little bit of the, hey, you shouldn't do this because the attacker can do this. But I feel as though every time I talk with application development teams, there's still this lacking in understanding of why we do a lot of things. And not only from a standpoint of why are we doing it this way, but also how are we using the application to understand why we should or shouldn't be doing it that way. Because not everything is a one-size-fits-all when you talk about security. I can't say that username harvesting should be fixed this way in every application. Some applications, and not even just some applications, but even within some applications, you may find locations that you're going to have some form of username harvesting, and maybe we have different mitigating controls to limit that down. And username harvesting is just one example, right? There's all kinds of examples out there. But I want to talk about how can we figure out a way to get better at portraying the why. Why are we doing this stuff? I've been doing consulting for a long time, done a lot of penetration test reports, where you have findings, and those findings have recommendations, and those recommendations are typically pretty templated. So there might be some customization to them, but if we go back to cross-site scripting, it's do input validation, perform output encoding. Maybe there's some references to some sites that show you how to do this. But it's pretty benign, right? It's very simple. Here's what you should be doing. Username harvesting, right? It's another good example. We identify where it is, and we throw back out there and say, you should return a generic error message here, right? Maybe it's the login screen, and you return different error messages based on valid and invalid usernames. You should just do this, right? Now take that scenario and move it to the registration screen. Okay, we have to be able to tell you whether it's a valid username or not on the registration screen. So returning the same error message may or may not be a valid option. So maybe where do we go from here? We always give some simple generic, you can implement a CAPTCHA, you can do this. But we never really get into the why. There might be some information at the beginning of the finding of, hey, this is why username harvesting is bad. But when you actually sit down and talk with the app teams, either that's not getting portrayed across, or it's just not really sinking in to the understanding of why it is we do this. And so we want to figure out how can we get better at it. I'll give you a good example of one where after discussion it started to make more sense, but we had a finding, and it was the change password functionality didn't require the current password, right? All you had to do was enter your new current password, your new password and confirm password, and it was done. Your password was updated. Now, obviously, there's some risks to this. Typically, you're probably going to see some sort of CSRF issue there unless you've implemented something else, right? But requiring the current password does mitigate a CSRF issue there, because now it's going to require the attacker to prompt you for a password to get your password, right? A lot more legwork there. It's not going to be as seamless as expected. So yes, we have that issue, but it goes deeper than that. And so as we start going through the conversation and start explaining how it is this can be abused, because the first question I get is, why do I need to put my password in? I already entered my password to get into my account to be able to change my password. So it's me. The issue comes in where what happens if your account gets hijacked? Maybe your session got hijacked due to multiple reasons, right? There's lots of reasons your session could get hijacked, but maybe you're using the application in a public space. Maybe the application has some other weaknesses so while in a public space allows an attacker in that same public space to maybe take advantage of those weaknesses and gain control of your active session. Maybe they have phished you or used some sort of social engineering to gain access to your current session. Finally, and there may be some other reasons, but Well, what if you just walk away from your desk and leave it unlocked? You just happen to be working, you get up, you walk, you go use the restroom, you leave your desk unlocked, and somebody sits down and starts manipulating your stuff, right? Say your screen's up, they can go in, they can just change your password, walk off, takes them 2 seconds, and now they've got the access into your account until you realize that. So there's lots of reasons why we want to have that check there. But if we just say you should require current password, that it doesn't mean anything, right? There's no weight to that besides the weight of security coming down on you to say you must do this, shalt not do it. It means something. And when we start creating this scenario where it actually means something, and this is the reason why we're doing this, then as the app teams, we start to gain a better understanding of, okay, this is why I'm doing it, right? I can go to my child and I can tell them, don't do X. But I'll tell you right now from experience, that doesn't really hold a lot of weight. Now, if they're old enough where they can start understanding a little bit of reasoning and you can start to reason with them and say, don't do this because this is going to hurt. Do you remember last time you did something and did this? This is what that's going to do. And they get that, right? And they start to thinking about it in a little bit different way. Now, they may understand, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get hurt, and they do it anyway, right? But at least they started thinking about that. The same goes here, whereas we start thinking about this and we start explaining it, and the app teams understand, hey, this is why I was doing this. And we come up with an architecture of how we're going to fix this in this app. Then the next app we write, we say, oh yeah, we need to think about this. This is why we're doing this. And maybe a new team member comes in and they ask the same question. Why do I have to require current password? Right? And it starts building up the processes. And it starts building it in so that now we just start doing it. Right? And this also highlights the reason why it's important to get everybody in the app team involved. Because if I get a pen test report back and it's got something like current password was not required to change my password, if I just send that back to a developer and I say, hey, you need to go fix that, they go add the current password requirement, right? Doesn't take very long. It's a pretty simple process. They fix it to get out of the door. Well, did it go back to the people, the business analysts that are writing the user stories? Did it go into QA to be able to test it? Hopefully from that point it did, right? More chance it didn't go back down to QA. But again, we only hit the person that fixed it, right? We put it under such a microscope, we look at it such finite that it's difficult to see that bigger picture that, hey, let's use this as a learning experience. And then once everybody starts understanding this, the next time that business analyst is going out and working on a system and they're writing up functionality for change password, they're thinking about, hey, you know what? I need to have the current password in this. And if the business side of things ask, hey, why do we need this? I have a good explanation. I understand why we need it, not a security said we needed this, and that's how we leave it. Because it shouldn't be a because security said. It should be a because I understand this, I grasp the concept, and this makes sense. This is why we should do this. The things that we're doing should make sense in what we're doing. So we have to start getting better at being able to portray this why. And it's going to be difficult because one of the problems we have, and this is really a whole nother episode, but I want to touch on it briefly here, is that when it comes to application security, and I focus on application security, I'm not your infrastructure guy, right? I'm not your wireless guy. I'm focusing on application security. And when we talk about application security penetration testing and testing in general, we talk about this shortage of security talent out there. When you throw application in front of anything, especially the term security, that shortage now increases greatly because we don't have a lot of people in the security industry with application backgrounds. If you were probably to go out and do some sort of poll, you find out that most of the people in security come from infrastructure. They come from the networking side. They don't come from the development side. And this makes it very difficult because they don't understand or truly grasp the true development side of things, right? They're fighting their way through this just like you are to get this done because a lot of them don't have that development background. So it's very different, right? Take somebody from development and go have them do network assessments, right? They're kind of fumbling through it, finding commands, and yeah, you can get through it and I can get you a report, but compare that to somebody that's whipping through and they understand routers and networking and everything that's out there and they have a really firm grasp of it. They're going to have a much better review of what's going on than somebody that doesn't. And so we have that same dilemma here where I talk to a lot of organizations and they don't have people that have application experience. Yes, anybody can stand up and say, hey, yeah, sure, I'm application security and I can test your apps for security vulnerabilities because I can put single quotes in boxes, I can put less than and greater than and put script tags. There's lots of material out there to show me how to hack an application. But does that really show me how to understand the application for recommendations and help the dev teams and the application teams understand what they should be doing in their current situation based on knowledge of development experience? We lack that, right? And again, that's a whole nother episode. But that's an issue that we have sitting out there, and that's what makes it a little bit more difficult. So we have to start thinking about the why. Why are we doing this? Why should I be relieving username harvesting, getting rid of that, resolving those issues? The other thing we have to understand is that context. What's the application doing? Another good example of this, I came across an application. It was doing logging. It was doing logging from the client side, which I wouldn't recommend. But again, as we talk through this, let's think about what are we doing this for, right? So typically, if I were to go through an application and I see, hey, look, they're sending up every page I'm hitting, they're sending up a little API request, a log what I'm doing, whether it's analytics, whatever they're doing with it, they're logging this, right? But it's coming from the client side, so I can manipulate a bunch of that data to change around what you're actually seeing in those logs. Well, from a security perspective, immediately that's going to jump out and be like, oh, whoa, this is dangerous because I can change it. You are looking and tracking every page I visit, the order I visit them. Maybe it's just for analytics, maybe it's not. That's a concern, right? Because from a repudiation standpoint, I could sit there and change my logs around. And maybe it's harder for you to determine. Now, sure, the IIS logs or Apache logs might still have this. You can dig into it. But you've got another logging mechanism that you're using, and I can manipulate that. I can tamper with that data. So that's a pretty critical flaw. Maybe not critical, right? But that's a high flaw just off the box. But a lot of times what we don't do in our testing is we don't really come back, and we have a lot of red team, blue team, purple team testing. It used to be called blue team testing years ago. They changed to purple team, right? We're collaborative and working together. But listen, I've not been on a lot of tests that are actually doing that, which is something that I wanted to push when I switched out and started doing my own thing through Jardine Software and helping teams with their application security. And when I do testing, it is a lot more collaborative. We do a lot more going back and forth. And when I have conversations with the teams, right, take this example. I'm actually going to talk to you about this. I'm going to say, what are you doing with this tracking? What's the purpose? Is it just for analytics? What are you using those analytics for? Is that driving business decisions? Is this for repudiation or non-repudiation? Is this for forensics in case something happens? What are you using this for? Because that's going to change what the level of the risk is there. Because if it's just, it's a way to track and troubleshoot, and if they call into tech support can actually go in and see steps they're taking, right? Okay, well, if I manipulate that data, and let's take off things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting, because they're not here in this case. It's just I can manipulate the data. Then what's the worst? Okay, yeah, I can make it a real pain to do troubleshooting with tech support. Kind of a waste of my time. So I don't know why I would do that to myself. Yeah, it would waste their time as well, but there's not a lot to gain there. But if you're actually using this to be able to say, hey, I want to see the accounts that viewed X policy number or account number, well, now we become a bigger issue, right? Because now if I can change that, I can view one account, but make it look like I'm viewing a different account if the only logging you're relying on is what's being passed up from the browser. So this is a concern, right? So you want to have these discussions, and that discussion starts with what are you trying to do? Why are you doing this? Again, it goes back to a why question. It's a little bit different why question. Why are you doing this? Because once we can understand why you're doing it, Then we can understand severity level. We can understand routes we might want to take to help reduce any risk here. In general, hey, look, it might make a lot more sense to call these logging queries from the server-side pages. Now, obviously, you can't do that if you're doing a whole bunch of client-side stuff and you want to log that they clicked the mouse here and they did this and they did that. But when you're viewing specific information that has to make a server-side request anyway, we can make that change and make that logging call from there. At least I can't manipulate that data. Maybe I can manipulate some of the others, right? But now we're starting to get down to the root of what are you trying to do? And this is what I talk to a lot of clients about. What are you trying to do? We look at login screens. We look at forgot password. We look at tracking. We look at logging. All this stuff. What's your goal? What's the purpose of this functionality? So once we can fully understand that, and I will tell you more often than not, there's a lot of functionality out there that from a pure testing perspective, we really don't understand because we don't understand every business. We don't understand every industry. Once we understand it, then we can start getting recommendations that actually suit what they're trying to do. And then when we start portraying those recommendations over, then there's a better understanding from that side, and then that understanding gets more ingrained in the process. And so the chances that next year, if I do this test or somebody else comes along and does a test, we won't see these same flaws popping back up because we've actually gained an understanding. We just didn't fix cross-site scripting because the scanner found it, or fix SQL injection because the pen test found it. No, what is it about SQL injection? Why are we having SQL injection? Let's get to the bottom of this and let's figure that out. But there's got to be a way that we can get better at portraying this information. So one of the things I do when I do engagements with my clients, we meet more regularly. I typically do a 30-day engagement instead of a week-long engagement where we'll meet once a week and go over what we're doing, how we're progressing. We actually work together on some of this stuff, right? We actually are being somewhat collaborative here. And then by the time they get that report, most of the stuff we've already discussed through. We've talked about what we're doing. We've talked about ways you can do it. We've talked about the functionality. But we're not seeing that across the board, right? This newer thing. So only very few companies are doing this level of engagement to help bring this up to speed. And again, I go back to one of the downsides to it is it requires more knowledge about the development experience, the development processes, understanding development, talking development language. If we want to sit there and say languages, developers understand it. If you've come from a development background, you've been through their struggles of building applications, you've built applications that have been insecure and been on the other side of receiving those pen test reports that have said, hey, you've got all these flaws, here, go fix them. And sometimes the struggle of understanding that, we have to make sure that we understand the whys. Why are these issues there? Why are they issues? Because it's going to lead to a better understanding of those flaws, which then leads to a better resolution to those flaws. Because I can't tell you how many times I've sent over a report, you go back and retest it, and what they did was nothing near what would fix that problem. And why? Because they didn't understand the problem. They thought they understood it, right? They got a report. They're like, oh, there's some information in there. I know what to do. I'll go fix it. But they really didn't know what to do. And I get that. Coming from a development standpoint, right? I don't want to sit there and be like, oh, I don't know what that means. But we got to start understanding. It's okay to say, I don't understand. Can you explain it, right? And hope that somebody can explain it in a better method so you do understand it, right? If they can't explain it so you can understand it, they don't know what they're talking about either, and that's a problem. You need to be able to understand it so that you can resolve the issue correctly the first time, and that's what we're really pushing for here. So maybe long-winded, maybe all over the place, I don't know, but I think as I was thinking about this, and I started writing a blog post about it that I will post as well, we have to start thinking about this why and getting better at portraying the reason why we're saying this should be this way, not just saying this should be this way, right? We have to have that why behind it because that why is the key to a better understanding overall and better secure applications coming out from the different industries. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I have another one coming out soon. But if you're out there, if you're getting these reports, ask the questions, right? Any testing company that is coming in and testing your systems should be available to be able to go over the report once they're done testing to make sure you understand it. Use that opportunity to get on a call, understand what they're doing. You paid for it. Make sure you understand the findings that are coming out. They may not have the exact recommendations, right? They're not in your code. They're not in your architecture. But at least use the time to fully understand what it is they're saying. Why is this a concern? And what's some direction I can go to help resolve this? So that way next time it's tested, we're not falling prey to this. So if you're getting these, don't just take the report at face value. There's a lot more there. So take the time to get into it. Any questions? If you've got comments, if you've got thoughts, topics you want covered, please feel free to reach out, hit me up at DevelopSec on Twitter or at Jardine Software. I monitor both of those all the time. So send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear any feedback you have. Otherwise, reach out. If you guys are looking for any type of application security services where you want a review of your applications from a security standpoint, if you want a review of your application program to see what you're doing, maybe understand some stuff you could be doing better, reach out to me. Let me know, and I'd be glad to talk to you about ways we can help out. So thanks again for listening, and I look forward to speaking at you for the next episode. Thanks again. You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.